Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guests are Jennifer Hilt and Michael Ronn. Hey, Jennifer and Michael, how are you doing?
Hello. Fantastic. How are you all?
I'm doing great. Thank you. So to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you or reminding them of your many achievements, if they've seen you before on the podcast, Jennifer Hilt is the author of the Trope Thesaurus, Trope Your Way to a Stronger Story, the Horror Trope Thesaurus, which has the greatest subtitle, Killing It with Tropes, and the upcoming Romance Trope Thesaurus. She is also the USA Today bestselling author of 24 books across 4 pen names, and Jennifer was on the podcast talking about Troping Your Way to a Stronger Story on episode 140. And Michael Ronn, who I think is in the lead now for a number of guest appearances, is the author of over 40 science fiction and fantasy novels and self-help books for writers. He runs the popular YouTube channel Author Level Up and serves on the staff of the Alliance of Independent Authors as a U.S. ambassador and co-hosts the AskALLi Member Q&A Podcast. And Michael has been my primary guest on 5 episodes talking about making the most of in-person events, estate planning for authors, emerging tech for the writing craft, bringing a creative endeavor to an end, and the costs of self-publishing a book. And he has also been a guest on several of the multi-guest perspectives on episodes where I ask past guests to weigh in on a particular topic. So I have had episodes before where within the episodes, there are several guests incorporated, but I think this is the first time I've had 2 simultaneous guests. So this is very exciting. And the reason this came about is that Michael and I were planning on doing an episode on year-end for authors. And Michael, I don't know if this is what you had in mind, but I was thinking of this as mainly a publishing Voyage business-focused kind of conversation. And then separately, Jennifer got in touch with me and said she'd be interested in talking about year-end. And again, Jennifer, this is my interpretation from a more creative point of view, like some of the stressors that author can encounter at the end of the year. And I thought it would be really fun to bring all of us together for a conversation about year-end in general. So year-end, the writing craft, and the publishing voyage. And I'm going to start out with the publishing voyage and ask you, Michael, to get us started talking about, give us one thing from a business point of view that you think that an author really must do when we're approaching calendar year end.
Yeah, this is such a great topic. I think the most important thing that you can do from a business perspective is start your planning early. So I know in the beginning of my career, I often started planning like late December after Christmas. All right, here's what I'm going to do for the next year. Yeah. And then, December isn't really even a full month, really, if you think about it. So, that 5, 6, 7 days after Christmas is almost nothing. And so I find myself in the middle of January and still not have had my plans done yet. So I actually got a tip from a fellow author friend, Maya Good. She said, start your planning in October. So what I do is I start my planning in October. So I feel like I have a lot more time to figure out what I want to do for the year. And my plans kind of change. It's never really set in stone. So that way, by the time I get to January, or even by the time I get to Christmas, I have done all that necessary work. I've thought it through and I can hit the ground running. So I think just setting aside the proper time is critical.
And are you looking at the following calendar year in that activity that you take part in October? You're looking at the following calendar year?
Yeah, I'm not much of a calendar guy. Like, I don't write down, here's what I'm going to do in January, here's what I'm going to do in February. I'm more of a strategic. So how many books do I want to do next year? What are the marketing tactics that I want to focus on next year? What are some of the writing conferences that I might want to attend? Is there a particular book that I want to make sure that I'm promoting? Are there different videos that I want to do on my YouTube channel? Just more of a higher level. All right, here's where I'm at career-wise. Where do I want to go? And then how am I going to get there? And then what steps am I going to take in 2023, for example, to get there?
I'm taking notes. So how do you, Michael, how do you break it down? Like, could you just give like an example, more of an example of how you break down the year then? In terms of just pick maybe one project. It's a great tip to start in October. So I'm trying to think, okay, how could I do that for this? Yeah.
Yeah. I think in terms of strategic priorities versus timelines. So for me as an author, it doesn't really matter like how long it takes me to get to where I want to go career-wise. I just want to make sure I'm always taking the right steps. So I'll give you a really easy example. So right now I'm sitting at about 82, 83 books. I've decided that I want to do 100 books by the end of the year next year. So that means I need to write, what is that, 16 books next year-ish. All right. Okay. That means I need to be thinking about, that's a lot of books. That's writing books at a pretty steady clip, right? That's more than one book a month. So I got to think about that. I also want to write 1 million words next year. So if I want to write 1 million words, what do I need to do on a daily basis next year? I need to write 2,750 words. I can't miss. So what happens if I get sick? What happens if I have to go on a vacation? What steps can I take to make sure that I don't miss anything? So the problem I've come across is I'm just not, my calendar is just crazy. It's insane. So if I tried to set a weekly goal, it's just never going to happen. But if I set a macro goal at the year level, then I know that I can work toward it throughout the year. And if I realize I'm falling short, maybe I'm only at 5 novels and it's June, I'm probably not going to hit that 16 number. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, this helped me because just breaking it down even more in a way that I could spread it out throughout the year.
And was there any thinking behind the 100 goal beyond 100 is a pretty cool milestone number?
Yeah, I just like the idea of having 100 books. I think it's kind of fun, kind of neat. So I just like, why not shoot for it? And even if I don't get there, I'm still going to be in the 90s. So why not try it? So I think it's important to set realistic goals. I've written 15 books in a year before, so I know that I can do that. But yeah, you got to set realistic goals too. You shouldn't set anything that's way outside of what you can accomplish. And that just comes through knowing yourself.
Jennifer, what are you doing in terms of your business planning for some upcoming period of time in your author career?
Some of the same things as Michael, though I think I need to step it up since we're already now, early November, but thinking of, what conferences I'd like to attend and what books I'd like to get out. And there's always the same thing of more books that I want to do than I think I can get to, or at least I find that everything takes me longer than I plan. So trying to be realistic about that. But also I have this problem where if I other times when I've tried to really say, okay, I'm going to do these specific projects for the next year, I lose motivation. So I have to almost trick myself in terms of, okay, if I get this project done, then as a treat, I can work on this other project. So I have to jerry rig various little incentives into my planning method. So I was trying to think of, for next year for me, I would like to do 2 nonfiction books, but then I was also trying to think what would be my treat fiction novels to work on. So that was the thought I was having most recently of how to have that happen.
And is it a treat because you enjoy writing fiction more than nonfiction, or what makes it a treat?
No, I enjoy both of them. I think what I enjoy is not doing the same thing. That's why I've tried to keep mixing things up, of alternating or trying different genres, because it's just really hard for me to do anything repetitive. That's the treat part, is the discovery is, even if I plot, there's always things that you don't anticipate coming up. And that's really the joy of, even in nonfiction, I find stuff all the time. I didn't know there was that association or something. So that's what keeps me going through the hard work.
It kind of changes up the rhythm so that it doesn't feel repetitive. Yeah, it's a great tip.
Yeah.
And so to what extent are both of you factoring in not only the enjoyment you're going to get out of, let's say, fiction versus nonfiction, but also income? If you're making most of your income from one, how do you decide how you want to divvy up your time between the more profitable and less profitable branches in the coming year? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, the data and analytics is critical, right? So one of the key metrics that I try to look at is, what's the distribution of my revenue? So how much of my revenue is coming from fiction? How much of it is coming from nonfiction? How much of it is coming from a certain series? How much of it is coming from another series? And then you compare that year over year. And for me, I want to make the majority of my money from my fiction. Okay, what steps am I going to take to, either whether it be I'm going to be diligent about applying for a book club every month, or am I going to do more cross collaborations, those sorts of things. But yeah, getting that data is critical. So for me, I like to look at kind of year over year stuff. And I have my own metrics about what looks right in terms of revenue. I find that some revenue is unpredictable, like affiliate income. You just never know, how much money you're going to make as an affiliate on anything. And some series, they start to dip over time. So you almost have to plan for that. So if you've got a series that you release this year, 3 years from now, you can't necessarily count on it selling as well as it's selling. So you've got to also be thinking about, okay, what additional product am I going to put on the market? And then how does that tie into what I already have? So for my nonfiction books, I have one big series. So it's like maybe over 20 books at this point. So I know that if I write a new nonfiction book that people like, I have it set up so where they can just go to the page on Amazon or wherever, and they can see all the books that I have in the series. And then it makes it very, very easy for them to do the one-click buy all sort of thing. Or it makes it easy to get the right book to the reader at the right time. If they're interested in plotting or pantsing or editing or whatever that might be, they can find that book quickly. So I'm always thinking about that too. It's not so much about the marketing. It is about the marketing, but it's also about how you're presenting the books to readers as well. And are there things that you can do this year that will help your portfolio as a whole look more attractive to readers?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting twist on the analytics that you can, as you're suggesting, look back and see what has been most profitable in the past, but that your thought doesn't necessarily stop there. You also have to think, is that a trend that you want to try to continue? Or do you want to intentionally focus on something that hasn't been making money in the past because you think that a third book in a 2-book series is going to make the first 2 take off or whatever? Jennifer, how about you? If you're planning your future time between, let's say, fiction and nonfiction, how are you deciding how to divvy that time up?
Yeah, and I'm still going back and forth a lot with that. I know, like I said, I want to do these 2 nonfiction books, and then I've really been wanting to do more mystery because previously I've done romance and urban fantasy. The urban fantasy has a lot of mystery in it, but I was wanting to just do some mystery. But then the thing with mystery is it's helpful to have a series. So trying to work on multiple books, I kind of have an arc for a 5-book series. So I've been trying to work on how I would do that in the next year. And then there's like a dragon fantasy adventure story that I really enjoy. So I'm trying to think of how to get that in there too. And that would be more like a standalone. So I was listening very closely to all the things Michael was saying, because it is like how to keep feeding what you've done in with what you're planning to do. And yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's a juggling act.
Yeah, I'm listening to both of you and I'm thinking through my own planning process. And for me, looking out a year does not work because I just can't feel comfortable enough about what my life, the world, anything is going to look like in 9 months, 12 months, 6 months, whatever. I really like planning on a quarterly basis. And so I have in my mind the direction I want my career to be going in. So I do look out a year, but I'm only sort of actively planning the coming 3 months. So I have, not surprisingly, a spreadsheet, and it's divided by quarter. And I borrowed from Orna Ross the idea of I divide what I want to do by maker, marketer, and manager, my creative work, my promotional work, and my administrative work, and what I want to achieve in each of those quarters. But by the time I get 3 quarters out, it's so general. It's not really driving my activities, but it makes me stressed to think it's coming up to the end of the year. And now I have to do the plan, because to me, it works much better if it's a rolling activity that every week I review the spreadsheet, but every quarter I'm like sitting down and paying a lot of attention to it and saying, does what I'm doing in 2 quarters really make sense? Because, and again, I think this is shading a little bit toward what we want to talk about with what Jennifer mentioned, but if it's all just coming up at the end of the year, that's stressful for me. And it also, I think, holds me back, because if it were now, we're recording this in the beginning of November, and I had an idea, but I was locked into this idea of a calendar year plan, then I might say, okay, we're coming up to 2023. I'm going to do that in 2023. I might lose 2 months because I'm waiting for the calendar year to come to start in on that activity. Michael, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's why I keep my goals flexible. I give myself North Stars. Okay, I want to publish 100 books by the end of 2023, but I don't specify what those books are. So if a book comes up that I really want to write, okay, I can write it. Like I have that flexibility. Same thing with the 1 million words. If I want to write 1 million words, it doesn't matter what the words are. It just matters that I write the million words. So if I end up wanting to write a mystery novel, then I built that flexibility in so that I can do that. And I've got some other goals around technology and business as well, but I try to keep those flexible. And whenever I take on a new project, I always ask myself, how is this helping me get to the goals that I set at the beginning of the year? And I find that I change course a lot. My goals don't change, but I'm one of those people that's susceptible to squirrel syndrome. If I come across something, it's like, oh man, that sounds awesome. I would love to write a book on that. Then I just do it. And I pay the price later, or if I just need to correct, then I just correct.
How do you assess whether that shiny object that's come up is a legitimate shiny object that you want to pursue or not?
Yeah. Does it give me more influence? I think is a critical question that I ask. Does it give me more influence and authority in terms of being an author? Influence to me is kind of broad. For example, I got invited to write a short story for an anthology this past week. Does that make sense? Yeah, because it helps me write about a topic that I've never written about before, in a genre that I've never written about before. That helps me practice my craft and ultimately be more effective with readers in the long term. With nonfiction, I want to write a book about estate planning. Okay, so that gives me more authority and helps me be more effective in my own author life. So I try to gauge my things based on that. And am I going to learn something? I think is also important.
Jennifer, how about you? Do you fall victim at all or benefit from shiny object syndrome? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
Totally. What my best author friend and I, we are like always laughing because we're forever sending back and forth screenshots of our revised plan. Like, honest to gosh, this is the one that I'm going to use for like the next 3 months. And like when you said about, it seems like I'm always revising what the plan is going to be. The thing is that I found is helpful is to have an idea generally of what it is, and then just keep tightening, at least for me, because the shiny syndrome is real, especially when you're in the weeds of a project and you're like really grappling with all the tough things that you need to do. And I find a new idea. The thing that makes it so seductive for me is I can't see the problems right away. All I see is the newness and the shininess. So I'm like, oh, that's going to be a snap to do. And I thought of all this stuff. And then it's like the same thing. So it's really hard to fight that because the grass is always greener when you're in there struggling. But I really try to finish things I start is really just the kind of the way. I try not to start something unless I'm like really interested in it enough, then I'll continue, and then to finish it when I start it. Because otherwise, from earlier in my career, I have a whole lot of manuscripts under the bed kind of thing. So trying to fight that.
Yeah, finishing what you start. That's such a great point. Because if you don't finish what you start, then you feel like you never really go anywhere. Right. So yeah, I think that's really important. As long as you finish what you start, doesn't mean you can do what you want.
And, going back and looking at something that you've worked on earlier, that is so helpful. It's hard to keep up with that all the time when we have a lot of things that we're juggling, but you pull it back out and you're like, I can see this had real merit or this needs work. And that time perspective is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that one of the hardest things to do if one is trying to make a business of their author career is weighing the non-quantifiable benefits of your level of energy about a certain project. So the example I'll use is that I have 2 series. I have the Ann Kinnear suspense novels, I'll say mystery novels, and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I wrote 2 Ann Kinnear novels. Then I wrote a trilogy of Lizzie Ballard, and then I wrote 3 Ann Kinnears, and there's going to be another Ann Kinnear coming up at the end of this year or beginning of next year, possibly. Planning. So at that point, I will have had 6 Ann books and 3 Lizzie books. And it makes sense to me just from a presentation or marketing point of view, like 6 is a good point, I think, to redirect my energy to the Lizzie books. But even if it wasn't, I think I'd have to, because I am just so worn out with mystery. And I've talked lots and lots on this podcast and other podcasts about the idea of the story frame and what a mess Ann Kinnear 5 was. While I was working on it, I always add the assurance that what the reader sees is all nice and polished, but it took much longer to get there than I would have liked. And I averted a lot of that by framing out the story for 6, but I didn't avert it all. Never claim that the frame is going to solve every problem. So there's been a certain amount of back and forth. And every time I make a little tweak, then it's another sweep through the story. And I was having a conversation with someone, I think it might have been Tiffany Yates Martin, about, can you bring a fresh eye to your own work? And at this point, I really can't. And the analogy I made was, it's if you're building a boat. I don't think any boat builder gets ready to go into the boat shop and says, another day of sanding. All right. No, it's just the workmanlike thing you have to do in order to make a good product. But at some point, like at this point, I am so tired of this story. And I'm really looking forward to switching my attention because as thrillers, the Lizzie Ballard books don't have the same kind of like fussy, where do the red herrings go? Where do I pay off that secret? Have I spread the possible bad guys across all the characters evenly? It's more just, oh, an exciting situation. Is she going to get out of it? Oh, look, she does. No, here's another exciting situation. So I think that's going to be my palate cleanser. Like at this point, I don't really care whether it would be a better business decision. I just really have to do something different. Have you guys ever made a switch in your direction on that basis that you just needed it for your own creative benefit?
Yeah, that's part of the many books under the bed, just of like, I just have to work on this idea and not necessarily having thought it out very well, but just needing to have that journey and experience. And I've always learned something with whatever the project is, even if it hasn't been successful with earlier stuff. It's like, oh yeah, like I learned not to just shoot off in the night with something that sounded really great and then without thinking through the other things. But I think it's really important to keep our energy level up, because that's the only way that we can keep going, is to feed that creative spirit long term, at least.
Yeah, if you don't keep that energy level up, the alternative is pretty bleak, right? So, I mean, I think it's human nature. I don't know very many authors that can say, all right, I'm going to write this and this and this, and then they write this and this and this, and they stick to it. I think it's just part of being an author and getting those ideas. And so I think the key is building ways in so that you can be flexible, so that you don't feel bad, or that your goals don't suffer too much if you do decide to take a different direction.
Yeah. And I also think that there's the benefit of making your creative decisions within a relatively narrow frame. So I write mystery, suspense, and thrillers. I really have never had a yen to write science fiction or fantasy or memoir, or list all the other genres. And so when I have a new idea, it's usually within those parameters of it's a mystery suspense thing, and that's going to become an Anne story, or it's a thriller sort of event, and that's going to become a Lizzie story. But I don't have the danger of going too far afield, like saying, oh, you know what would be fun? Dragons. And then going off in that direction, which might be fun creatively, but is so far afield from the other things that I'm doing that from a business point of view, it's going to be a tough sell. But Jennifer, I know you're writing across a bunch of different genres. How do you factor that in when your creative interests are that widely spread out?
Well, the hard part about it is like needing to have various pen names because they are different. So then that just makes more work, I find, when they're very different genres, especially with romance. I'm trying to not do that as much, just because it just takes more and more time and energy to keep up all those various things going. It's not the writing that's the problem. It's all the other things that take up the time. And they really do. There's not any other way around it that I figured out. Knowing myself more, where like after about 5 books, I get, like you're saying with your series too, you get kind of like tired of it and you're just like, I just don't want to do that thing again. So I'm like trying to think about that going forward, of like, okay, so knowing myself with that, and that I keep getting in myself in these situations, like how can I deal with that? Or what are some ways around that? So I'm trying with my mystery series. My brother and I are co-writing it. And so I'm curious to see how that goes, if that helps me stay on the straight and narrow a little bit, because there's 2 of us, as opposed to me just being like, okay, I'm done with this. I want to go do something new, shiny, new.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Michael, you write across a lot of topics in your nonfiction work, but it's also pulled together by the fact that it's mainly author-centric work. And I think your fiction is more like mine, more focused on a particular area. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I'm primarily science fiction and fantasy. I actually have more fantasy now than I do science fiction. And I've decided to focus mainly on the urban fantasy side, just because I found that I really enjoyed that. And so I decided to, okay, I'm going to set my tent up here and have fun there and see what happens. But I do write science fiction short stories still. But for the most part, 90%, 95% of what I do now is in one genre. And that took me a long time to get to that point, though, because I feel like I had to write across a lot of genres to figure out what I really liked. I certainly paid the price for that in the beginning, because if you look at my early portfolio, it looks a little unfocused, a little scattered, but that's okay, because ultimately I got to the right spot, and I wouldn't have gotten there if I didn't experiment. So it's all a journey. Like you said, Maddie, it's a voyage. And what I like to do is look backward. So when I'm doing my planning for the year, I also like to look backward, because that can give you a good idea of where to go forward. So you can look at your accomplishments for the year and say, okay, I did A, B, C, and X. Oh, that's weird. Why did I do X? Oh, I can connect X to B. So then that helps you craft a narrative. And so then you can make sure that all your dogs are pulling in the same direction. So for example, if you write mostly fantasy and then you decided to write a mystery, you can figure out what to do with that mystery. Right. As Jennifer said, do you put it under a different pen name? But if you're not going to write mystery, then maybe you don't want to do that. So you can find some sort of way to connect your portfolio in a cohesive package. And that's just on the portfolio book side. You can apply this kind of level of thinking to every area of your career. But looking backward is also helpful.
Yeah, I'm just going to put in a quick plug from taking the short tack about the benefits of using short fiction to explore a new genre, so you don't find your 60,000 words into your space opera and decide you really hate space opera.
Yeah, I wrote about 1.2 million words before I figured out where I wanted to be. Yeah, 6,000 word short story is a much better way to go.
yeah, it's a little less painful then. So, Jennifer, you had mentioned that you have like a planning buddy. What information do you share? What information do you not share? How often do you check in? Talk a little bit about that and what benefits you're getting out of that relationship.
Well, we've been friends for a long time, and we've kind of journeyed together. So we've evolved, like in terms of from when you start out and you're really new and learning all the business stuff to like having more of a sense of, okay, what we should be doing. But we're pretty real about what we share in terms of like the whole messy sheet of this is what I had, this is what I'm going to have, this kind of thing. It's really funny because I feel like one of the best questions writers are always asking each other is, how do you work? We don't necessarily want to talk about ideas so much, I think, is you're always like, I'm like, oh, okay, I want to know how Maddie works and how Mike works and how do they actually do that?
Yeah.
And with her, it's very much that way in terms of, okay, she breaks it down, I think, more granularly, but it's just so helpful to like, oh yeah, she's revised what she's doing for the next 3 months. She writes lots of projects. She's very focused, more like Michael. And I'm a little more, I don't know, woo-woo-y about it. Her things are really focused.
I love that word.
And it makes me go, yeah, okay, I need to tighten it down so that I can really get this thing to where I want in 3 months instead of, okay, it's going to be done in 3 months. And I'm pretty sure I can make it and I'll know like things will be tight in that last month. So I feel like without us it's more the benefit of knowing somebody a long time is that you organically develop that. But I think there's lots of like different groups and ways you can do that. I think it's just the other important thing with sharing things like that is trust, in terms of you really need to be okay with saying, this is really what I'm thinking. This is what I'm holding myself accountable to. And I don't know, it's just, I'm not good at sharing those kind of things in groups just because, I don't know, why that's so hard for me.
It kind of feels like planning by committee, right?
Yeah,
you're kind of opening up your interior processes to random strangers. Maybe they're not random strangers, but they're certainly people that don't understand you and your business. I was going to ask you, Jennifer, do you and your partner challenge each other? If you've got a goal, do they say, is that really the right thing to do?
We do, but like you just writes a tremendous amount of stuff that I'm always like, okay, you really think you're going to, and I would say 95% of the time she does. And so I'm like, that's amazing. And I'm just, the only thing I say is if it's too much to the point of you feel like your health is suffering or something that you should back off, but she doesn't, she's really committed and she does a great job with it. So we are honest about that kind of thing. And then I think like what you said about the planning by committee is true, because she knows enough about me and my family and personal life to be like, oh, is that realistic with everything you have going on? Or that kind of check is really helpful. Especially like one of the things we were going to talk about is like going into the holidays. Like this is not a time of the year that I would load up with a big project to finish by or 31st. And so for me, it's just really lucky that I have that relationship with her, but it took a long time. And it's kind of like dating, that you're different people that you get to one where, oh, like you're, and we write different things. We don't write the same thing, but it's just where you get used to sharing and be comfortable about that. And it helps, like we'll send each other messages like button share today, that's what I'm about. What are you doing? Same kind of thing. So it's really helpful in that way.
Yeah, that sounds really useful, having a sounding board, someone, because when you do this, you often do it alone. So it'd be nice to have that extra person.
Do you have someone like that, Michael?
No, I don't. I'm alone in the dark.
I took one of Orna's planning courses, and then one of the other attendees and I got together a couple of times afterwards. And it was very helpful because we both took it in very different directions. Like, we took the base information that Orna said and we tweaked it a lot, which I think she would be all behind. And it was just helpful explaining it to someone, because even though we took each of our plans in very different directions, having to explain it to someone else was really helpful. And both from a content point of view, but even from a format point of view, like, I really am never going to capture that level of detail. But I do find that the further I get into my author career, the more I realize that if I'm actually going to exchange substantive planning advice with somebody else, they have to be quite similar to me, because I've had lots of experiences where I've been in classes or in groups that were all rapid release, let's say. And so if I'm putting out a book every 9 to 12 months, that's relatively fast, but it's not as fast as a lot of these people do. And so using their objective planning approach doesn't necessarily work for me, but also subjectively, you get comparisonitis and you think, oh my God, they're doing 6 books next year. Should I be doing 6 books next year? No, not really, because I just can't do that. But I do think that unless you find the unicorn fellow author whose business is where both their creative approach and their business approach is very similar to yours, it can be difficult to use them for refining the details of your plan. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's like Jennifer said, it's like dating, right? You got to find the right person. I do think that there could be some benefit to having people that are slightly on a different level. I don't think it's a good idea for somebody who's very business focused and who's established in their career to be bouncing ideas off of a newbie, right? Who's never published something. I'm not saying that, but in terms of because having that different perspective could help challenge you in ways that could be beneficial. But if you're not a rapid release person, if all someone could give you is rapid release advice, that's probably not a good fit, right?
Right.
I think the best thing about like that issue I was saying with trust is that you realize that, because it's so hard to realize that every little bit of work we have that we do works towards accomplishing our goal. And sometimes when you're in the middle of a project, you just feel so lost in the weeds. And that is really helpful to realize, showing up every day and chugging through and if you have to do multiple revisions or something, you are moving forward. And you've got to this far, and like now you have a plan to get to the rest of the way. So that's really nice to be able to find that. But it's hard to it's trying to balance that with like competition and other people's goals and stuff like that is difficult.
Well, I'm going to use that as a great segue to a conversation that's more about, I think, Jennifer, what you were thinking about when you made your proposal. And that is more I'm going to say, dealing with the creative life at the end of the year, the pressures that come with the end of the year, the pressures that come through the holidays. Jennifer, just talk a little bit about what made you think of that topic.
Well, basically living it. When my kids were younger, I really struggled with that a lot. And there's a lot of people who have this issue. It's hardly unique to me. And especially if you have small children or like elderly parents you're taking care of, I think it's like a caretaking issue, I guess is the best way to describe that. And for a long time, I really had a hard time with not feeling like I was making any progress and feeling like I wasn't a real writer, because if I was a real writer, I'd be able to get stuff done, even if there were distractions. And so over time, I've come up with some different ways that I cope with the end of the year craziness, which I feel like starts October 31st and goes to early January, when one of my son's birthday was, right after the holidays. And one of the best things I've done is I do a retreat in early January. And this next year, I'm actually going to go to Mexico with a couple friends and like writers, and that's really exciting. But it doesn't have to be like that. I've like literally gone to a nearby motel and stayed there for 2 nights myself, which I have to say, or 3 nights, or whatever you can afford or what works to you. And I have to say that is the most awesome thing after you've had many busy months of doing a lot of other stuff, to just have this like silence to focus on your work and think about, okay, like, what do I want to accomplish this year? And so I really try to use that as my carrot going through the end of the year with difficult things of thinking, okay, New Year's going to come, January, I'm going to have this, I call it like head time, where I just able to sit and do that. Not everybody can do that, but if there's a way that you can promise yourself, if I get through these next couple months, there's going to be a routine again, which I love. And then I'll be able to get back to things that are more like in line with what I want to be doing creatively and business wise.
That's so cool. So Michael, what are your thoughts of the more emotional side of year end for creativity?
Yeah, no, that's a great tip that Jennifer gave of having a retreat that you can look forward to, whether that's out of the country or at a local coffee shop or hotel or whatever that looks like. That's a really good tip. I guess for me, I spend a lot of time in self-reflection, just in terms of what went right, what went wrong, what were some of the things that came my way that I didn't expect. Should I have expected them? These are all kind of things that I try to pay attention to at the end of the year, because I think so much of good planning is self-reflection and knowing yourself and knowing what your limits are, what you can accomplish. And I like to look at the projects that I've worked on and just try to pick out, okay, what went really right for me this year? What went really wrong for me this year? And then just try to figure out what the lessons are, and then build that into the planning for the next year.
And is that something you're specifically doing toward the end of the year?
Yeah, I do most of it in October. I've pretty much got my plans for 2023 baked, and they'll change a little bit from here and there. But yeah, I like to do it in October because there's just something about, at least where I live, the leaves are changing. It's kind of peak autumn. So it's a symbolic good time to do that. But yeah, because once you get into Thanksgiving and Christmas, you just lose all perspective of time, I think. Yeah. You blink and it's gone.
Yeah.
The reason why I had asked Maddie about talking to this with you guys was because Anne Lamott in her Bird by Bird book has this line in there where she says, never start a writing project in December. And I read that like 20 years ago. And I think I tried to do it multiple times before I realized she's right. You just not to jump into something in December. So I was kind of like curious, I don't know how else people deal with the difficulties of trying to navigate all that stuff, because it is like extra things we have in addition to all our regular work.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely started some projects in December, but I can definitely attest that the holidays do get in the way. Me personally, I wouldn't let just the fact that it's December stop you from starting. I think it's just more realistic expectations. If you're going to start something, you know what your holiday is going to look like. So if you got to take a week off or 2 weeks off, I don't think that's bad. You just have to find ways to energize yourself so that you've got that momentum once the new year starts.
Yeah, this was interesting for me to think about because for a variety of personal reasons, I've sort of opted out of the holidays. This is easier for me to do because I don't have kids who have expectations about holidays. I don't have a lot of family nearby. My husband does have a lot of family nearby, but I don't have to deal with that. Are we going to your parents' house or my parents' house for Christmas? No, that's easy. I just don't do a lot of things. I don't do holiday cards. I do very minimal gifts and so on. And it's been such a boon to me because it has taken away a lot of the pressure. And the people that would be impacted understand, like, I don't feel like I'm shortchanging anybody because of this decision I've made. So I'm not facing those same kind of pressures, I don't think, as much as you are, Jennifer, about all the expectations that are swirling around family-wise and creatively and so on. I do think that year end it can be mentally challenging because, you're coming to the finish line. And it's that time when probably people are most traumatized by thinking about the things they didn't get done and least able to actually do them in the time that's left in that year. So I think it's another big pro for saying maybe the calendar year isn't the way to plan, because you get everything jammed up at the end. And the least productive time is when people are expecting you to be the most productive.
Absolutely. And I was just going to mention about NaNoWriMo. I personally don't put a big focus on that. And one of the reasons is when I was doing this earlier and my kids are a lot younger, I felt like November was like one of the worst months you could pick. I just wanted to say, like, to people who are listening, if they're struggling because they have other family obligations that are just making it hard to get your work done, it's okay if you don't finish it in November or whatever. It's okay to, as long as you keep working is the important part. So it can go on to December, the new year. Just try to keep with your project, but don't feel like, oh, I didn't get it done this month, I'm a failure, I'm not committed, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be so cut and dried like that. Just to try to keep working. It's just the thing I wished I had realized earlier on.
Yeah, I love that you said that, Jennifer, because there are people out there who definitely their stress level goes up to the max once November 1st hits. Really, once October 15th hits, people start getting pretty stressed out over it. And the thing is, and this is true of every project in your writing career, not just NaNoWriMo, but no one's going to come to your house and shoot you because you didn't finish a book by November 30th, right? So if you're stressed out to the point where it's affecting your work, it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, is you got to find ways to keep it fun. So if you're stressed out like that, you're going to burn out. And that's not, I think, the reason they have us sign up to do this.
Yeah. Well, I think those are both lovely thoughts on which to wrap up our conversation. Jennifer and Michael, thank you so much for this fun 3-person conversation about planning. And Jennifer, please let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you online.
Oh, thanks, Mandy. JenniferHilt.com.
Right. And Michael?
Yeah, if you're interested in my fiction, you can check me out at michaelleron.com. If you're interested in my YouTube channel and my books for writers, you can check that out at authorlevelup.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you.